If there is a spirit world, and there is, to believe there's not a spirit world, you must consciously either deny or ignore the evidence. There being a spirit world strongly suggests the existence of God. The only way that I can see to deny the existence of a God from the existence of a spirit world is to invoke the science of the gaps fallacy. But other than that, the existence of a spirit world does not tell us the identity of this creator, the identity of this God. So can we identify this God? The Christians would say yes, he's the God of the Bible. But the God of the Bible is a demanding God. He demands our servanthood to him and to others. He, as Jesus, gave us that example when he washed his disciples' feet. And then in the continuing record we have of his teaching, Paul gives us in Philippians the instruction, do nothing out of selfish ambition. And even more demanding, this God has set sexual boundaries. So those unwilling to submit to sexual limits have a stake in denying this God of the Bible. Aldous Huxley was transparent about that in his publication Ways and Means. I've posted this quote from that publication before. So a lot of people don't want this God of the Bible to be the God that's implied by the existence of a spirit world. There's a desperate attempt to deny the validity of the New Testament by many people, which is necessary if you want to work your way back to there is no God. And later on, in another post, we'll look at the historicity, the historical value of the actual writings of the New Testament. But for now, let's just look at what it says. Jesus claimed to be God. I know there are critical scholars who say, no, Jesus never claimed to be God. He claimed to be the Son of God or the Messiah or a prophet or whatever they can come up with that isn't God. In John 8:58, Jesus said to the Pharisees, before Abraham was, I am, claiming himself to be eternal. He also used the name, I am, the name that God gave to Moses from the burning bush when Moses said, what's your name? What should I call you? You may say that Jesus didn't actually say that he was God, but to the people to whom he was speaking, they understood that to be exactly what he said and tried to destroy him because of that. Before his crucifixion, look at what Jesus said. And because of those words, his accusers said, what need do we have of witnesses? He has just, in effect, claimed to be God. And from that point, they did execute him. After the resurrection, he appeared to some of his disciples. Thomas wasn't there. Later, when the disciples said to Thomas, we've seen Jesus alive, he said, I will not believe unless I can see him myself and touch his scars. Jesus appeared to Thomas. Thomas did touch his scars. And Thomas's response was, my Lord and my God. Jesus didn't correct him and say, oh, nope, I am the Son of God. I am a prophet. No, Jesus blessed Thomas. So anyone saying that Jesus did not claim to be God is negotiating with the text. Sorry, guys. What I believe is from 1 Corinthians 15, 3 and 4, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, and that he was buried and rose again the third day according to the Scriptures. So let's take it by the numbers. 1, Jesus was real. He actually existed in history. 2, he was crucified by the Romans. Up to this point, there is agreement among scholars. Scholars on both sides of the issue will say, yes, that is true.
I mean, I know in the crowds you all run around with, it's commonly thought that Jesus did not exist. Let me tell you, once you get outside of your conclave, there's nobody who, this is not even an issue for scholars of antiquity. It is not an issue for scholars. There is no scholar in any college or university in the Western world who teaches classics, ancient history, New Testament, early Christianity, any related field who doubts that Jesus existed. The reason for thinking Jesus existed is because he is abundantly attested in early sources. That's why. And I give the details in my book. Early and independent sources indicate that certainly that Jesus existed. One author that we know about knew Jesus' brother and knew Jesus' closest disciple, Peter. He's an eyewitness to both Jesus' closest disciple and his brother. So, I'm sorry, but, again, I respect your disbelief, but if you want to go where the evidence goes, I think that atheists have done themselves a disservice by jumping on the bandwagon of mythicism.
But then the question is, was he raised from the dead? And his being raised from the dead is at the heart of Christianity. Without that, there is no Christianity. Justin Beerley and Dan McClellan on the resurrection.
5 facts from history to show that Jesus rose from the dead. These 5 facts are agreed on by the majority of New Testament historians, whether believing or non-believing.
All right, let's see it.
Fact 1. Jesus died by crucifixion. It's recorded in all 4 Gospels, New Testament letters, and other contemporary sources.
So it sounds like we're talking about Gary Habermas's minimal facts argument for the resurrection.
Yes, this book by Gary Habermas and Michael Licona.
This first one is accurate. The overwhelming majority of scholars agree that a historical Jesus was executed by the Romans by crucifixion.
Just for this video, let's jump to number 5.
And fact 5, the early church experienced explosive growth amid these events.
There's also widespread agreement about this.
5 historical facts, but what one explanation makes sense of them all?
The one explanation that makes sense of them all is that very soon after Jesus' death, claims began to spread that people had witnessed the resurrected Jesus.
As I'll explain, deception, hallucination, and legend don't make sense of them.
So you don't need any of those things to explain how these claims could have spread like wildfire very soon after Jesus' death. These were people who had just experienced extreme trauma. They were cognitively motivated, primed, and vulnerable, and it would not take much at all for them to interpret their experiences as experiences of the resurrected Jesus. Even the story of Jesus on the road to Emmaus is adapting Greco-Roman mythology to fit an experience that wouldn't be very surprising. Someone talks with someone on the road and they get a Jesus vibe from them and afterwards think, that must have been the resurrected Jesus in disguise. And then they could very easily go and tell people, hey, I experienced the resurrected Jesus on the road to Emmaus.
No doubt Dan realizes that the 2 gentlemen walking with Jesus on the road to Emmaus did not recognize him while he was on the road. They had such an interesting talk that they invited him over for supper, and as he ate with them, he broke bread, and then they recognized him, and then he disappeared before them. Now, that's pretty traumatic. So that's going to be difficult to misinterpret, difficult to misunderstand, difficult to not remember accurately, I would think. After he was crucified, His followers were cowering. Oh no, look what they did to our leader. If they're going to do this to our leader, they're going to do this to us too. Just think what's going to happen to us now. They were hiding away with the doors locked. But then they changed. They changed completely from hiding to boldly proclaiming that Jesus had risen. And literally thousands of people agreed with him. After Jesus sent the Spirit and people were wondering what was going on the day of Pentecost, Peter explained it to them, and 3,000 people became believers. Why weren't they critical? Why didn't they say, prove it? They knew. They had seen him alive, or they knew someone who had seen him alive. And these followers of Jesus, who were cowards before the resurrection, turned into bold proclaimers of what they had seen, to the point of going to their death rather than say, oops, I was wrong. Yeah, more than one person on here has said, oh, lots of people are martyred for their faith. This is different. We have the 9/11 thing, martyred for their faith. Yeah, that's what it was. There were the kamikaze pilots for Japan. I think there were they monks who set themselves on fire way back in the day to make a point. But these people didn't die to make a point. These people died simply because they refused to give up the truth that they had witnessed. It was not an aggressive martyrdom. It was a submissive martyrdom. It was, you can do to me what you want. I can't not believe. And among those who were martyred for their faith was Paul, highly educated, formerly Saul, aggressively opposed to the church, on his way with papers to imprison other people who had accepted belief in Jesus. Jesus stopped him, and Paul turned around to be one of the great advocates and contributor to much of the New Testament. Another one was James, one of Jesus's brothers. If your brother comes up to you and says, hey, you know what? I'm God. Of course you don't believe him. But after the resurrection, James believed. James became the bishop of the church in Jerusalem, and James eventually was martyred for his faith. He died because he could not deny what he knew to be true. In just making a couple of notes on the life of Jesus, there are two events that I would like to highlight. One is the healing of the man born blind in John chapter 9. It's one of my favorite chapters in the Bible. The man was blind from birth, and he is now a legal adult. You don't fake that. You don't fake blindness from birth. And then Jesus healed him so he could see. You can't fake that. So if we have an accurate account of the events of Jesus' life, this is an indisputable miracle that Jesus performed. And then the other one that was sort of a watershed for Jesus ultimately going to the cross, and that was the raising of Lazarus. Lazarus had died. That was not a point of argument. He had been buried for, 4 days? Jesus said, remove the stone. And they were hesitant because they knew what happens to a body when it's been dead. And they said it would be unpleasant. Jesus said, remove the stone. And then he called, Lazarus, come out. And Lazarus came back to life. Prior to Jesus' own resurrection, which was his ultimate conquering of sin and death, those two miracles also validated who he was. If The record we have is reliable. In the next post, I'd like to look a little bit at what we know of the New Testament record.